Aloha, dear friends. My name is Xavier, and you're all watching Oh God Guide Me. And today we are joined by Chris, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his journey finding the Baha'i faith and the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Welcome.
Hey, aloha. Thank you for having me.
Aloha. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay, so in brief, I'm an American, born and raised New Yorker. I'm doing my PhD in Belgium, and I live and work in Kyrgyzstan. I'm actually in Kyrgyzstan right now, Bishkek, the capital.
Oh, very cool.
Thanks. And my PhD is in philosophy, and like most journalists, you kind of end up being a specialist in everything, jack of all trades. But I kind of lean more in the direction of politics, media, and last 2 years, actually, believe it or not, counter disinformation. I do a lot of stuff about that.
The counter disinformation is probably a very important aspect of your job at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm in the Russian media sphere. So I mean, every nation that has the ability to sort of promulgate disinformation is behaving badly. So it's not just the Russians, but they've raised it to a fine art, let's say.
Yeah, they're very good at what they do.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So. Well, all right. Well, that's great. It's an awesome line of work. So was that the line of work? Is that how you discovered the Baha'i faith? Tell us a little bit about that, how you happened to hear about it and learned about it.
No. So I originally was an Islamic studies specialist.
Okay.
And I think I might have initially encountered the faith that way because I read Ocean Loman's book about the phenomenology of religion in one of my religion studies courses as an undergraduate. He's, I don't know, for the audience may not know, he's a well-known British Persian historian. So that would have been when I was like 19 years old. And he mentions the Baha'i faith quite a lot in the book as a case study alongside every other religion. Like what's great about the book is that it's very egalitarian, very equal between the different faiths. But what's peculiar when you're an undergraduate is you see this thing called the Baha'i faith popping up, and at that time the numbers were still quite low, only a few million. I mean, it still is a few million, but even lower than now. And it's peculiar because it's like being held up as like this interesting case study because it is alongside the monstrous size religions of Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, it's like enormous. So you're like, oh, okay, that's this little faith, the Baha'i faith, is like in and of itself has the rights to be an interesting case study. But the way I discovered it was I was living and working in an Arab Jewish cooperative village in Israel called Neve Shalom Wa Salam. And I myself am actually half Jewish from my father, and I was raised Christian, and I was actually practicing Islam. So
very
I was like, thank you, sort of like living progressive revelation. And so what happened was you have all these identities and you're sort of trying to sort them all out, and there's this little village where they are literally doing the same thing, right? They were founded by a half-Jewish Christian monk to try to make explicit peace between the Jewish and Arab populations, and the Jewish Arab populations are largely Jewish religiously and Muslim religiously, right? So then it was like during an extended weekend off, it was actually Halloween 2004, I was basically taking some time off to travel around northern Israel, and I ended up making my way to Akka and Haifa. And actually in Akka, I was walking around on the pier, the edge of the stone old city, and I remember having a very just odd vibe. I was looking down the way of an alley, and whatever it was, it drew me in, and it brought me right to the house where Baha'u'llah used to live, which years later I visited again as a pilgrim. And that was the first time I actually encountered the faith. And then I really liked Akka, and the hostel owner suggested that I go check out the Hanging Gardens of Haifa. Oh, and by the way, my father years back had also visited Haifa in the 70s, and he told me as a child about the Hanging Gardens. I don't know what they called it, the Hanging Gardens, but that's how they called it for whatever reason, these two people. And I was like, yeah, okay, right. I remember my father mentioning that to me. So I went there, and I did not like it. I don't know, I got there kind of late in the day. I guess the local staff were didn't have their coffee, whatever it was not a great experience. But a weird thing happened. I did actually end up inside the Shrine of the Bob. As a non-Baha'i, as a random tourist, bumbling around in the gardens, basically. I got inside there. And the experience is rather dreamy. The memory of it is very dreamy. I ended up then going all the way up to what was then the visitor center, and just staying on looking out over the bay, and wrapping up my journal, and just like unleashing on the Baha'i faith. just like, who the heck is this? They're just another bunch of elitists, like, I mean, why can't I find because I was sort of on the outs of Islam, and I was like, why can't I just find like a religious community that just doesn't have its head up its butt, basically, right? It turns out that a small world, that one of the people working there at the time is actually a member of the community here in Bishkek, and it may very well have been her who walked up to me and told me to get out of the Shrine of the Bab.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. So again, like a crazy, like a TV show. But so then I just sort of forced it out of my mind for the next 2 years. It forced it so hard out of my mind that when I was doing my first master's degree, it was in Islamic history, and I was working on a particular kind of historical theory about how the Quran was created. Like as a book, how the Quran was created as a book. There was an Italian Orientalist who had proposed that in the Quran you have these letters that appear sometimes seemingly randomly at the top of certain chapters in the Quran, and he had proposed that those letters were initials of original owners of the folios when the Quran was just like basically giant palm leaves. It was an interesting theory, and I was trying to remember what this guy's name was. So I was on Wikipedia to find his name and find his theory. And lo and behold, at the bottom of the Wikipedia, there was something about how the Bab also has these letters in his chapter on Yusuf, Surah Yusuf. And I'm thinking to myself, the Bab, where have I heard the Bab before? And so I began looking him up. And that began a 6-month sort of process, which involved, I must say, some quite profoundly personal, emotional, and I must say mystical experiences that did eventually lead me to joining the Baha'i faith. And so so the Bab sort of has a special place in my heart because I sort of feel like he's been like this compass point for me, this like
absolutely.
Yeah, and apparently I'm not the only one for many people in the faith, and of course historically that was his function, right? So that's it in brief. I mean, I could tell the audience about like mystical experiences and et cetera, but you can tell it's a bit of a long story. So brief.
I've known people that it takes them years and years and years to come to a realization. And
the big thing was, it was sort of a trust issue for me, both internally and with Baha'u'llah. It was basically boiled down to, the mystical experiences boiled down to, do I gamble that Baha'u'llah is not crazy and is not a sham, right? Especially because I was raised a Christian. I came from a very Baptist background. So you have a very, very strong sense of hell and that God punishes mistakes.
Of course, the non-believers, the false prophets, very strong.
Not just that, but even the believers can easily fall astray, and then the hammer falls, right? So it's the God of, let's say, post-Calvinist Christianity or Calvinist Christianity is an unforgiving God. I mean, it's a God that already, if you come from a Puritan tradition, has already decided that there's seemingly a certain amount of people who get to go to heaven or hell, right? But in general, even for later versions of the theology that bring free will in, you're still basically punished if you make a mistake, right? This is not a merciful, forgiving God. It's a very, it's a very tyrannical God. Yeah. So this was very much in my background, which was then like, do I take this chance?
Right? Yeah. What if I'm wrong?
What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And then it also came down to a matter of self-trust as well. trust in my own capacity to make the right choice.
Yeah, because I mean, you already had this experience. It was kind of a negative one, and can you trust yourself to be an unbiased collector of information in this, given that?
Yeah. And part of the issue was so unlike a lot of, I think, Western believers, a lot of Western believers tend to be like atheist or spiritual, but not religious or agnostic, right? Before they become Baha'is. At least the ones I have met, I have tended to stand out as unusual in that I was always religious. I was always a believer, and I was actively seeking, moving through the traditions, right? And Islam was a big player. And I often compare my relationship to Islam to like a first marriage, in the sense that it was a very fiery, tempestuous relationship with a lot of breaking up and getting back together again. And in the end, we divorced. And we've been much better friends since. It turns out that Islam and I are awesome friends. We could never have been lovers. We rock it as friends, and collaborators, and partners, you name it, right? And then the right girl came along, and that was the Baha'i faith. And I had to sort of undergo a shift, I guess, whether via Islam or through the failure of my time in Islam, to be able to, I guess, withstand more uncertainty. So there were a lot of things in the Baha'i writings that didn't jive well with me, alongside a lot of things I did. One thing that stands out to me from back then was the infallibility of the house. And I was in Philadelphia at the time, and the chairman of our local spiritual assembly, Nason Arfai, who, if anyone from the World Center is watching, say hello to Nason for me. I remember he said something very profound. He said, "You know what, Chris? The most important thing is your relationship to Baha'u'llah. Everything else follows." And that was like a ground shift for me. That you didn't need to have all your I's dotted and T's crossed, unlike in the sort of the Calvinist sort of approach, right? In the Calvinist approach, they talk a lot about the leap of faith and being born again, and all this. But it's so much more emotionally charged, because there is this underlying tone of don't make a mistake. And what Nason was basically saying was, it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if things don't even work out with Baha'u'llah. Like what matters right now is the relationship with Baha'u'llah.
Yeah, because God is forgiving.
God is forgiving. Yeah.
Very essence.
And God for some reason has put you on this trajectory. So go with it. It continues to be, I got to say, a lesson I do still struggle with as a person. But that was a ground shift for me. Okay, so they say the house is infallible. I find that hard, but there's a lot of other stuff that does click. And I just can't, I find so the other thing is, I sort of feel my experience testifies to the centrality of the manifestations as people. We often read about this, and I think it's sort of unconscious for a lot of people, or like semi-conscious maybe, but I really felt it very intimately because my movement through the religions was always about the manifestations. And not really even about the systems or the history or whatever. So like I was very moved by Moses as a kid and by Christ as a kid. I was extremely moved by Muhammad. I used to have arguments with non-Muslim friends. I'm saying, yes, I know the history is very brutal, and I know there's all this stuff about women. I know this, but the guy could not have been lying.
Yeah.
Just if you read the biographies, it's just something very sincere for you. And if you read the Quran, you hear like God sometimes arguing with Muhammad. Like you hear there's a person there.
Yeah, and it's really a connection to him that you can feel.
Yeah, you feel connection. You feel like this guy is like, he's more than human, and at the same time, he's also very human. And and he's not lying, and he doesn't come across as crazy either, right? He comes across as someone who is like, almost in a sense, like broken through to the other side, let's say. And the initial stories of Muhammad going to his wife and saying, "I think I'm crazy." Right? I don't know if you know the story about him and Khadija, but that's amazing, right? That's amazing. That's like recorded in Islamic history. And Baha'u'llah had the very same thing. The other book that was very important for me, I actually joined after finishing, believe it or not, the Kitabi Ibqan. That book sort of pushed me over. But the book that really, I think, really started getting the wheels turning was again a book by Mojan Momin, and it was his biography of Baha'u'llah. And he captures this moment when Baha'u'llah is still in the prison in Akka. He's not yet allowed to like walk around. He talks about himself saying, "We have consented to be chained on your behalf." And I to this day, I still have this image of him burned in my mind, like with the art behind him and wearing like drabby crap clothing and having washed it months, saying this to, I forget who the audience was, and I mean, first off, aside the fact that he comes across as like a massive human rights defender, in this moment, right? And that's a whole subtext, by the way, about Baha'i history. Like, to what extent is our history like that of the history of human rights defenders? But more to the point was just like, this guy doesn't come across as like as a lying, shuckster. He doesn't come across as crazy either.
Exactly. In the Bible, they say that you'll know them by their fruits. You
know them by their fruits. And the fruits are them themselves, like what has actually happened to them as people. I think that's kind of what it gets to.
Their lives, their events, their teachings. That's all the fruits.
Yeah, right.
Suffering in their
and it's funny that for me the Bab has played such a central role because both times I actually didn't know a whole lot about him. I knew much more about Baha'u'llah than I knew about him. He was like this weird non-presence.
Yeah. A mystical force almost.
A mystical force. But again, I think that's kind of somehow appropriate because he was very self-effacing. His whole premise was that, like, I'm not number one.
Yeah,
I'm the guy. I'm the prologue.
I'm the gate.
I'm the gate. Yeah.
I'm the light before the dawn. The sun is coming.
Yeah. The fact that we remember him so ardently, like, is odd in a way, right? Because his whole premise was like, I hope I'm forgotten. Pretty much, like I'm the rug. He even says somewhere like I'm the carpet that the manifestation is supposed to walk on, or something like this, right? Yeah. So, or if not him, one of the original Babis. So maybe it is appropriate that he was for so long a kind of non-present presence.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a crazy tangent just to say that that was the basic process, was like trusting myself as a person, trusting Baha'u'llah, so to speak, as a person.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful that you were able to take that, this sort of tidbits, these fractions of informations and these little feelings that you had and really dive into that as a person. It's a lot of personal responsibility to be able to do that for any religion, to say, I'm going to truly study Islam or Christianity and really study it for myself. And that's such an important teaching in the Baha'i faith, is that independent investigation of truth. And you really exemplified that in your search for it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But it's funny, we don't. Okay, so I'm doing a PhD in philosophy, right? So now you have to be careful with me because philosophy is like, though, we don't actually really stipulate really what the investigation of truth should look like. It's still a very fuzzy process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Writings about it.
There's as many ways to find the truth as there are to interpret it. And it's so important in that discovery.
I've known a lot of people who come to it through the creative arts. I'm one of the very few people I can think of who really came to it intellectually. The other people I can think of who came to it intellectually were people I introduced who themselves were studying philosophy, actually. Or a good friend of mine in America. So most of it I know came to it through like the creative arts, or they were seekers, but were not like subscribed per se to any kind of
philosophy.
Philosophy, spiritual system, let's say, and then like stumbled upon it through a kiosk, or they saw a pamphlet, or like a random YouTube video. Here, Kyrgyzstan is interesting because we can come to Central Asia later in terms of how many people here encounter the faith, because they are like much closer to an historical process that was actually much older for you and I as Americans, through actual, not just pioneers, but hands of the cause. Like, that phase in American history is like dead and gone, for better or for worse. Whereas here, there are many people who actually like were directly introduced by hands of the cause. Ruqayya Khanum herself even came here at one point. So that's sort of jarring for me to encounter, because so for us, we're already, as Americans, we're sort of already developing a bit of a critical tradition, right? We're already sort of thinking to ourselves, because now Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, talks about the routinization of karma, of charisma, and like this sort of like, you have this initial prophetic figure who then has to sort of build institutions around himself, and he sort of transfers that his original charisma to those institutions, right? And this is ultimately the House of Justice by way of Abdu'l-Baha and Chogi Effendi, right? But there's other things about it too, through which he transfers his charisma. And one of the ways is obviously through these kind of missionaries, right? Who then like go to places and like spread the word, who either know him directly or know someone who knew him directly. Then what happens is when they're gone, you sort of develop a critical tradition. This is when you start getting, if not yet philosophers and theologians, you start getting nonetheless sort of intellectuals, historians, administrators, people who begin thinking about how to actually make this thing work, and sort of like, what does it mean to actually do this in the real world? And so we are like, I guess you could say a generation or two into that process now in the United States.
Yeah, it's very,
in Kyrgyzstan,
very early.
But here in Kyrgyzstan, it's as if they're still at phase one, because many of those people came in the 90s and passed on, and you still have a lot of that like initial kind of wonderment phase where there's also sometimes not a lot of like thought about what they're doing. It
just shows how much room there is for such a wide growth in every community throughout the world, is that, and that interconnectedness because of the nature of the Baha'i faith.
Yeah. So, okay, this is still the first question. So let's move on to the second.
No worries. So you went into a lot of good detail, of very good way to learn about you and your experience in the faith. You told us a little about your struggles in that. What writings really helped alleviate some of those things, or some of your favorites?
There's been a handful. So there's two that have always stood out to me. There's three that have always stood out to me just for like just really emotional reasons. One is when Baha'u'llah's in the Sea of Chal and he actually sees the maid, right? There's the other one when he compares himself to the royal falcon, and there's another one when he compares a god to a goldsmith. And each of these sort of serve three different emotional functions for me. The first one is like, it's intimate. It's like, it's almost a romantic relationship with God. It's like being loved by God.
Yeah, that torrent washing over him, as he described it.
Yeah. The royal falcon serves more of a kind of immensity function, right? He talks about how the royal falcon spreads its wings and the shadow causes all the other birds to fly. We have a lot of falcons here in Kyrgyzstan, and it's true. And there's something about like the immensity of it, the severity of it, I mean, God as a hunter, right? That also makes it interesting. It's like, it sort of sometimes reminds me that it's okay to undergo these terrible disruptions in my own life or in history, because that is what happens, right? It's the falcon spreading its wings and everybody is basically saying, oh shit. The falcon is here. And then the goldsmith one is similar to the maid one. So he talks about it, and I haven't been able to find this actually in an official publication. It comes from Christopher Buck's Paradise and Paradigm. Maybe it's his own translation. He talks about how the goldsmith is making the ring, but then actually wears the ring, which is interesting, right? And it's a kind of, in philosophy, we think of this as anti-dualism. So there's sometimes this notion, it crops up in our communities, that somehow the material is bad, this world is bad, right? Like ultimately, this is just like you don't need this. History is bad. People are basically bad. And what is being said there is the opposite, right? Why would the goldsmith make the ring? And if the goldsmith made the ring and then just sold it off, you could say, yeah, he just does it for profit. He has his own agenda. But he puts the ring on. He puts the ring on and he looks, look how pretty I am with the ring, right? So this is a bit of a reassuring a quote for me in a broader way. So if the maid of heaven is much more directly reassuring, like you matter. This one is more like a general, like things matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We view the world as it's a creation of God, and therefore ultimately good.
And ultimately good. Yeah. God wanted this for some reason, right? It's not like an accident.
And this world is perfectly made exactly how He wanted it. It's just, when we don't follow whatever religion, we don't follow the teachings of our religions, we're just not manifesting that perfection. And the Baha'i.
Yes, I agree with that. I think we can get to this. My own personal struggle is I'm tired of people not manifesting it. I'm tired of myself not manifesting it. I'm tired of the Baha'i communities not manifesting it. I'm tired of human society not manifesting it.
Yeah.
And arguably, it's also, you could even argue I'm tired of nature not manifesting it. And so far that nature is also essentially a work in progress.
Absolutely. A seed is not a tree, but it will be, and it will manifest those attributes of a tree. And that's what we are as people. We must grow spiritually and manifest those attributes. I think Shoghi Effendi said, we must not only be patient with others, but also infinitely patient with our own poor selves.
You know, I haven't actually seen that Shoghi Effendi quote until now. Thank you for sharing.
No problem. But yeah, that patience with others and ourselves is very important in recognizing that we're still growing, both as communities and as individuals. And so, sometimes we see that. And we just,
I mean, for me, it's definitely, I gotta admit, it's a struggle. So this is something I very much struggle with, and these three quotes don't help. I mean, maybe the Royal Falcon quote kind of helps. I mean, they help in different ways, but it's sort of like, this is something I still very much struggle with.
Well, all right. Well, that's wonderful. Before we run out of time, what would you like? What's the most important aspect to you that you want people to take away from this?
So I'm presuming that our audience is primarily Baha'i. So for them, I would say the big thing that I struggle with personally, two big things I struggle with personally, that I want you to take away from are, one, when you are like a professional Baha'i, like me, when it's difficult for you to do activities, how do you reconcile that with your identity? And how do you also reconcile if, like me, you're also struggling with your profession as well, right? So you want your work to be prayer and it's not going very well, right? So you got this double-edged thing, right? You're not doing well financially, materially, professionally, and you're not like doing the collectively recognized list of things that everyone says will build a new world. What do you do? And the best thing I can say is keep the faith. You got to carry on. There is a bit of a mysterious mesh between your choices and God's plan, right? It's not that you don't have any say in the matter, and it's also not that like you have all the say in the matter. You can make mistakes, and that's okay. And the mistakes sort of get somehow integrated into the journey. And they I sort of think of God almost as an improviser, a novelist who's got a clear end in mind. That actually is not much of a plot. Like it's very much a skeleton of a plot.
We write the plot.
We're writing the plot, exactly. We're the characters are the ones actually writing it. And so it's okay. It's okay. This may last a few decades. In your situation. It's already been a decade. It's been 11 years since I've been a Baha'i, and this has been basically my situation as a Baha'i for 11 years. So it may go on for a while, but keep the faith and try to take very seriously what the Bab himself had said. He says somewhere, whether in the fire or whether in hell or in heaven, let me worship you all the same. Even if you lead me to the fire, right? Even if you lead me to punishment, etc. So also. We're told that, endure, keep the faith, and you'll be rewarded, right? And I think it might be helpful to simply say, you know what, even if I don't get rewarded, it's still the right thing to do. In principle, it's a thing I must carry on, and to try to be detached even from reward. Because as I've been trying to tell Baha'is here, think of the coronavirus, right? If the coronavirus is the will of God, if this came from God, He's coming for all of us. This is not like, it's not like we're going to be protected because we're Baha'is.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. So you need to sort of like get that kind of, if I may say, some more primitive reward punishment thinking out of your head. It's important. It is the foundation for a lot of thinking. That's why the Baha says you need it. But it's a bit of a higher level where it's not easy to maintain. I feel it all the time where you say, carry on. It doesn't matter in the end if it's heaven or hell. Let me worship thee all the same.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. Wow.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. A lot of very insightful thoughts and a wonderful story about your journey through the faith, which is going to continue, of course. And thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe. Before I leave you off, don't forget to check out Spiritual Journalism, which is Mr. Schwartz's personal blog. So that link will be in the description.
Who has 2 thumbs on a blog? This guy.
And so that'll be in the description. And I hope you guys will check that out and check out my next video and the previous ones. And have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
See you guys.